All right, I've started. Okay, welcome to Nested Loops. We're doing chapter 3. I'll turn it over to Alex.
Great. Thank you. Let me present my screen again. Sorry, I stopped presenting just to see everyone is in here. Want to make sure again that everyone can see the full presentation of the change slide. Yep. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so yes, this is chapter 3 of Shape Up. Stop running in circles and triple good matters. Chapter 3 is called Set Boundary. This first step here, we're starting off with shaping is the setting, and if you remember, shaping is sort of the whole idea. It's what the next couple chapters are based on. We were given the steps to shaping in this last chapter, but so the first step to shaping is setting boundaries on what we're trying to do, right? So we start off with a raw idea when we're talking about building a feature, right? And raw ideas are something along the lines of, customers are asking for proof notifications. That would be a raw idea, right? So before we go down the rabbit hole of solving these raw ideas, we need to set these broad sort of terms to make our discussions a bit more productive. So that is the idea of setting the appetite, right? So when we're setting the appetite, some ideas are very exciting and we want to jump into solving them right away, right? It's easy to get excited and move too quickly to committing to resources or having long discussions that go nowhere. So I think every team is sort of guilty of this, it's like some idea for some really cool feature that either you or your team wants to do comes along and everyone's super interested in it instantly, right? And everyone wants to jump in. And I think it's pretty easy to get caught in that certain rabbit hole of jumping in and discussing an idea that, those discussions sort of end up either not ending up on the table or definitely going nowhere, right? Flip side of that are less exciting, but feel like they are needed for customers or business. In the example that was given in chapter 2, I think it was the idea of the calendar, right? That was not an idea that was necessarily exciting to them, but one that was presented that seemed like it was a good feature for their customers or, needed for their business. In both these cases, it helps to explicitly define how much time and attention a subject deserves. So, that's breaking it down into asking a question like, is it a big idea worth an entire cycle? Or maybe a question like, would we only consider it if we can implement it as a minor tweak? That whole idea in the shape-up world is called appetite. So appetite is defined as the time budget for a standard team size. So they set appetite in two sizes, right? So they have small batch appetite, which is this is a project that a team of one designer and one or two programmers can build in 1 or 2 weeks and batch them together in 6-week cycles. Or they have big batches, right? And this is a project that takes the same size team of full 6 weeks. And I'm really glad they answered this next question, which they say in rare cases where a scope is large enough that doesn't fit in 6-week cycles, they break off meaningful parts of the project and try to fit that into a 6-week appetite. So the whole idea with appetites essentially is a way almost of setting time budgets and breaking down time budgets. This idea I thought was really cool. They say a fixed time variable scope. So an appetite is not the same as an estimate, although I definitely thought it similar when first reading, right? But these next lines that they have, I thought were pretty insightful. So estimates start with a design and ends with a number, whereas appetites start with a number and end with a design, which I thought was pretty cool. So yeah, and the idea, which I think a lot of teams do estimates, right? You get brought a design or some, there's definitely usually some project planning or whatever, and then you get brought a design and then you estimate how long that thing's going to be they give you the design and you return them a number, right? Of, oh, okay, I see this, and I think this is going to take X, Y, Z amount of time. But the idea of appetites is that you're starting with this fixed number, this fixed time, which is, in ShapeUp's ideas, the 6 weeks, right? And then after that, after they have this fixed time, and then they have to make their design fit within their fixed time, right? So with a fixed time box, they are pushed to make decisions about what is core to the project and what is peripheral. And yeah, I mean, I think that that's different for sure than most teams I've ever worked on. But the idea of that you have this super fixed time and you're banging out and hammering your scope, right? The scope is variable and not the time. The whole idea of the chapter is fixed time variable scope, just pretty interesting. So then they go into this whole bit about how you should respond to raw ideas, right? So our default response to any idea that comes up should be interesting, maybe someday, which is essentially a soft no that leaves options open. It's often too early to say yes or no on first contact, even if we're actively excited by the idea. So the idea is that we want to avoid making commitments that we don't understand, and showing too much enthusiasm right away can set expectations that things are going to happen. And I know that I am certainly guilty of this. I think that's a skill, that is like a muscle, even. It's definitely, I think it's a good concept, right? That you should be responding in a more subdued way than getting excited and mismanaging expectations, maybe. Next idea goes into narrowing down the problem. So in addition to setting the appetite, we usually need to narrow down our understanding of the problem, right? So what that means is, instead of taking requests at face value, we want to try to dig deeper to find the root of the issue. So we should be flipping the questions from what could we build to more of a question of what's really going on, or what's really going wrong, in fact. So using that calendar example that appeared earlier, I think in chapter 2, while working on the calendar, they asked customers who wanted the calendar feature, or I think the example is they asked a single customer who wanted the calendar feature what they were doing when they thought to ask for it. So what were they doing specifically when they were thinking like, oh, I want a calendar feature in Basecamp. So the customer explained that they had a big chalkboard calendar, and one day, I think it was the story that they were saying was that they got a client that called asking to book some time with them, and the customer was in their office, so they had to drive into their office in terrible traffic and actually look at the chalkboard to look at free and open space, and anytime they had to, what time event essentially they had available to book up a client. So then they thought, oh, if I had this calendar feature on, Basecamp, I wouldn't have had to drive in and take a look and see, what that time I would have been able just to see. So what they took that to mean was not, in fact, that the narrowing of that was that they wanted a calendar to see the free spaces, right? Not to do everything necessarily that a calendar does. Yeah, and I thought it was an interesting example. I think narrowing in general can be, I think that's a pretty useful concept. But then they go into this idea of grab bags, right? So with the point being to watch out for grab bags. So redesigns and refactorings are often unclear ideas. They are not driven by a single problem or use case. So the idea being that redesigns and refactorings are these grab bags, right? So when someone proposes redesign the file section, that's a grab bag, that's not a project, right? Because it's hard to figure out what redesign the file section means. Where does it start? Where does it begin? Where does it end? So they suggest a more productive starting point is we need to rethink the file section because sharing multiple files is difficult, right? I like that for sure. I mean, I think anyone in this making projects is definitely guilty of seeing an issue and making it being like, oh, this needs to be redesigned. Right? I like the idea of breaking these down into smaller sections. So when we break this down, when we do when we go to our more productive start point of when we need to rethink the file section because sharing multiple files is difficult, we can start asking things like, what's not working, right? What part of the design can stay the same? What part of the design can change? We can really start from a better place rather than just oh, we need a redesign. It's they also give us the section to beware of anything labeled 2.0, right? So file systems 2.0, right? Often you'll need to narrow it, or it's going to be a grab bag. I think I've worked at places definitely where we labeled things 2.0, and I would say generally that's true. 2.0 often is very, very vague, and it means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and it's, I think, really hard to break down a project like that. And I think that's all of chapter 3. I mean, I personally, I really like this chapter. I really like this book so far. It has some super interesting thoughts, and I know we're still at the very, very top level here, but yeah, I don't know. It's stuff that you read that feels like, oh yeah, that's like almost like common sense, but I don't know. It's just some stuff that I don't necessarily think that all teams are implementing. I don't know, Alexis, if you thought any of this chapter was interesting or insightful, but yeah, I know you do a lot of project planning with Jeff.
Right. Yeah, I don't think we've been guilty of labeling anything 2.0 for a while now.
No,
but but that's a funny point. Like it is too broad, it's too general. It does mean different things to different people. Yeah, I don't know.
One thing I really liked was this bit on the fixed time variable scope. Like, I think it's really common for a bunch of teams, right, to start with like a design and then get an estimate on how long it's going to take. I don't know. I don't know if necessarily this would work for all teams or not, right? But having this fixed time instead, right? Starting off with like, oh, we have 6 weeks, and then whittling down like what we can do, what can be done in 6 weeks, and changing the scope based on the time. I don't know. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, this was touched on last week too. I think it's an interesting approach, and I wonder how it would affect like some of our projects if we tried to do it this way. But it's probably like from a business goal, standpoint. I don't know how that would pan out.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting question. Like what is just ideal, and because companies have business needs. Like when I hear this and I hear that like, oh, you only have 6 weeks to complete something, I think about like things that would be mission critical that, because the idea with this is that if you don't complete it in the 6 weeks, then it goes back. And I know that there's chapters later on that talk a little bit more detail about what happens when you don't complete in 6 weeks. But I know from teams that I've worked on that I can't think of a reality where it's like, oh yeah, this, we said we'd get this done in 6 weeks and now it's taking longer, but now it's just done. We can't, we're not doing it anymore because it's gone over the 6 weeks.
Stop, I don't think it's like a Top Chef situation where it's like, oh, hands off the table, like you're done. Like I think like something like this would have to have some flexibility, because it's like, then what's the difference between 6 week time frame and there's an MVP versus 6 week time frame, get as much as you can done, and we'll extend it afterwards if you can't do it. Like yeah, I'm sure we'll get into more of that later.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, Jeff. Do you have any thoughts on the 6 week time frame thing, or more specifically this fixed time variable scope? I know that this is a space that you're also in. Or Jeff might not be on the call. I actually can't see the but I'll open that question up to anyone. I don't know, thoughts on this chapter, on how maybe, everyone's coming from different backgrounds. I don't know everyone here on the call, but how it could affect your workflow or anything like that.
Hello.
Hi.
This is Koichi from East Coast, by the way, first time here on OCRB, by the way. Nice to meet you guys.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to move to OC, by the way, if possible. Yeah, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe one comment, or maybe just this is probably comment we have to think about. So what's the difference between Agile and Shape Up? So for example, the Scrum is a little bit tweak things, and they say, okay, let's see how it goes. And at the end of a sprint or at the end of 3 sprints, which is equivalent to this 6 weeks period, they have things they haven't done. And the difference between Shape Up and the Scrum way or Agile way is probably what we're going to do at the end of these 6 weeks about those unfinished work. And that is, I'm very curious how you guys will think by reading the later chapters. But otherwise, the Agile / Scrum is much difference. So to me, that's thinking about, and what is the drastic difference between the Scrum, Agile, and the Shape Up?
Yeah, that's something interesting. We are more agile focused here, and there was some discussion for areas and the differences. One, we guess that we'll have to see in the later chapters. But yeah, I mean, one major thing that was discussed was that with sprints, sometimes it can feel like, oh, if it doesn't get done this sprint, it'll just move into the next sprint. And I think that's sort of a common thing that can happen where work just like, it almost is like, oh, if it just doesn't get done, it's just going to get moved into the next sprint. I think, it's pretty easy to think that way and get pretty, I think everyone's guilty of sometimes doing that, and so for me so far, only I've read, 4 chapters in this book. Seeing this real emphasis on this time deadline, right? Of the 6 weeks, and I know, Alexis, you were saying like it's not hands off, at the buzzer, but they definitely seem to focus very hard on this time difference, on this, this is 6 weeks, and if you don't get it done, it's not done, and it has to go back to the betting table or whatever. So far, that's been the biggest difference for me. But I will be interested to see as we go on, what other differences come up.
Well, from the first 2 chapters, it seems like that if it doesn't get done in this 6 weeks period, it just gets abandoned.
Yeah, that's the part I got.
Yeah, or something else, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if you were to compare it to Scrum, there are quite a few differences. Like one you just talked about is fixed variable scope. Mm-hmm. You try to plan it as something that can be finished in this 6 weeks period, right?
Right.
But then if it needs to be something meaningful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the deadline is like a little bit behind. or whatever, like you can still negotiate what the scope is, which is something that would not happen in Scrum, right?
Right.
The project is the project. You just, getting like a small chunks, but all the chunks are gonna get done at some point.
Right.
And this is one in their approach is like, no, the project get reshaped throughout this whole thing, this appetite period.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't get finished, it goes back in the backlog. You're not gonna go back to it. It might get abandoned altogether, because again, 6 weeks is a long period, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So if it cannot be done in 6 weeks, maybe it's too big of a project or too big of a change or something. There's some reason why it didn't happen. So I kind of can see this. It's like, okay, we gave it a shot, it didn't work out, and we're moving on.
Yeah. I definitely agree. I like the idea. It's just I think you're right. That's very different from Scrum, the variable scope, right? Like the scope is the scope always, and that never changes. So I think it's an interesting idea. I guess my question, I having never worked like this or seen this, like, I guess there's always business goals and business needs. Like how, changing the scope, just, I don't know. To me, that's almost like, like, oh God, changing the scope. I don't know. I wonder like how that would play out against like business needs and goals. I don't know who that question's for, but I just think about it.
I worked at places where the scope was variable and we have fixed deadlines, but the project would not get scrapped out.
Yeah.
Right? So like this also different from what I've done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an interesting one because of the time period, six weeks.
Mm-hmm.
2, for the fact that, again, for 6 weeks it has to be it's a significant project, and I think like what they're trying to achieve is a release schedules of fixes, of features, and that kind of stuff, right? So
Right.
It's a fixed release schedules of meaningful changes and meaningful features. While like agile is, so you got like a 6 weeks, then your Scrum normally is about 2 weeks. Agile is a week or less, right? So like it gets more minute. So like you kind of like sometimes in agile or other ways, like a very atomic small changes, you kind of as a developer, designer, whatever, you kind of like lose track of the gestalt, right? Like the whole thing, and you feel like you're always churning without applying to the project.
Mm-hmm.
I think like one of the things why they're doing this is also to by staying on the same project for like 6 weeks, you kind of have a realization of how you affected the project, how you changed, and like there's a little more job satisfaction.
Yeah.
It's like normally like you're in a team, 6, 7, 10 people, and you might work on 5 different things that are unrelated, but like one single feature might have 3 or 4 different people working on it and building the same part. So like nobody takes the thing from start to from beginning to end.
Right.
There was an actual book. What was it? Not Make It Stick. Can't remember another title. It's a famous book, like read about 10 years ago. And it talks about what makes people happy at work.
Mhm.
And a lot of it had to do with seeing the final product. Like people that are working in assembly line, they don't see the final product, have a low job satisfaction.
Mhm.
And this kind of makes me think in those terms. Like agile, you're kind of an assembly line. In Scrum, assembly line, you do like crank the wheel, and then maybe you like reach it, or record, whatever it's called, some lever or whatever, but you don't see the widget at the end of the build.
Mhm.
And I think like what they're doing here is closer to taking the widget from the beginning to the end, and that results in a greater job satisfaction.
That's interesting.
So that's my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this maybe comes from me maybe the argument is not knowing the official exact rules of Scrum and Agile, but going back to the idea of you have the 6 weeks, and then if you don't get it done, it's over. What is the official we were talking before about work constantly going over in sprints, right? Like, oh, if it's not done this sprint, it'll go happen next sprint. Is that supposed to be what happens with Agile or Scrum, or is there supposed to be work is always contained per sprint?
No, in Agile, you're supposed to aim for slightly more than what you can handle.
Mm-hmm.
So because there's an understanding that the project is never done, right? The project is always evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's the second part of it. Like a lot of time, the project has an end date, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the launch,
right?
And that is the first phase of the project. So like at some point you end it, you launch, and the team moves on. But then there is the maintenance, right?
Mm-hmm.
In reality, when you work for a company, you launch a product, then you maintain it and you evolve it. Like Photoshop changes all the time, but they have a release schedule. So in their mind, like the people that came up with Agile and Scrum or whatever, they were trying to solve different problems.
Mm-hmm.
Scrum, they were trying to solve communication and roadblocks. So that you don't get too far along in a process without, because release schedules used to be 2 months,
mm-hmm.
Or longer, sometimes 6 months or a year. And then you discover around 6-8 months later, oh, we've been going the wrong direction, or this cannot be done, or we're delayed because people were not communicating. Scrum aimed at resolving lack of communication, roadblocks, and that kind of stuff. By having a Scrum Master, the Scrum Master job is pretty much just to remove roadblocks from the team.
Right.
The Agile is more towards, it aims at having a methodology of development that instead of doing design up front, where it's the moment that for instance, you're trying to delay all the decision to a time that more about the project in order to make those decisions. Because generally with waterfall, people were making a lot of decision up front, tell the developer to develop, and then 6 months later they discovered what they thought how the system worked. That's not how it works, or what the requirements the customer wanted were not those.
Right.
And they've been spent like 6 months going the wrong direction.
Right.
So like they try to have the client involved in the process so they can both do discovery and planning as they go along. But pretty much like the client learns about what they actually want. The people that are building the widgets, they do the same thing, like they learn along, and pretty much any big decision that will derail the project is delayed for as long as possible to when it is going to cause the least amount of derailment.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And yeah, shape up, I think they're like what they're trying to solve so far from what we know. I guess job satisfaction and meaningful changes in a predictable schedule. That's what it seems to me so far.
Yeah, I think problems, like, it's very focused on, narrowing the problem and scope and making sure the scope fits. I guess, yeah, I think so far at least that's the main things that I picked up from the 3 chapters.
All right. Move on to the 4th.
So no 4th this week. 4th's going to be next week.
Okay.
Yeah, 4th's next week, and yeah. Yeah, but so far a big fan of the book. I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts on any of the sections.
Let's see who's that. I see an M. Forrest, how are you feeling?
I'm dying. I'd talk otherwise, but I can barely live. Oh. Yeah. Oh. I'm looking. I can't find my freaking mouse and my glasses on.
Sorry to hear that.
I see.
Okay, so then I guess next week we're doing chapter 4.
2 weeks pickup.
2 hours, 2 weeks to do chapter 4. And then we could probably do chapter 5. I don't know if